Hi everyone, it's glad to be here once again. We'll be talking about investment decision. This is one of the key aspects of the financial management syllabus under investment appraisal. Now, when an organization is faced with making an investment, purchasing an asset, there are two types of decisions that they need to make. And one is the acquisition decision, and the other is the financing decision. Now, when we talk about investment decision, taking a look at the acquisition decision, it is very important that when evaluating an investment, say acquiring a machine, there are actually two different decisions to make. And one is the acquisition decision. And what does this entails? This entails investments, deciding whether the investment is worthwhile. So is the investment worth doing at all? That is the question. Here we check if the asset will generate enough benefit, that is cash inflows, savings, and so on, to justify acquiring it. And also, when we look at the financing decision aspect, the question is, how should we pay for it once we decide it is worthwhile? That is the question. So the two main options is either we do an outright purchase, that is buy with funds or debt, or lease, that is rent or lease it instead of buying. So these are certain things that investors, organizations face when it comes to acquiring specific assets or investing in specific projects. So how do we compare the financing options? So to decide between buying and leasing, we compare the present value of the cost under each options. Now, when it comes to buying option, we can look at the initial purchase price. Maybe possibly the asset can be funded with borrowing. Then when it comes to purchasing or buying option, we can also have the benefit of capital allowance, that is with less any tax relief. Yes. And also we look at the maintenance cost if borne by the buyer. So all these are some of the things we look at when we look at the buying option. And when we look at the lease option, the leasing options, leasing option entails the regular lease rentals pay over the lease period. You look at the tax relief available on the lease payments, and also issue of discounting, because these payments happen at different times. So we can't just compare raw figures. So we discount all costs to their present value using the after-tax cost of borrowing. So for us to determine the effective interest rate after tax savings on debt. So these are certain key components that organizations have to look out for when trying to invest in specific projects. And the decision rule, whichever option has the lower present value of cost, is the cheaper financing method. So for example, if we have PV of buying to be present value of buying to be 95,000 naira and the present value of leasing to be 100,000 naira, which is cheaper? Buying is cheaper. So it's better to buy because the PV of buying is 95,000 naira and the PV of leasing is 100,000 naira. It means the PV of buying is much more cheaper. So in deciding if an investment is worth acquiring, we must still decide how to finance it. So to do this, we compare the discounted cost of buying versus leasing, and we select the cheaper option, that is the option with the lower PV, the option with the lower PV. So that is the approach to that. Now, in talking about lease and hire purchase, when we talk about lease is similar to hire purchase in that an equipment owner, that is the lessor, conveys the right to use the equipment to the lessee, that is the equipment user, in consideration for regular rental payment. So the essential difference is that the lessee rarely becomes the owner. The leasing company retains the legal title. So the asset is never owned by the user from the perspective of the tax man. So lease versus hire purchase. In hire purchase, the user makes installment payments, that is the hirer, and eventually ownership passes to the hirer after the final payment. So the tax treatment is, since the hirer will own the asset, they can claim capital allowance, that is the tax depreciation. While for lease, the user, that is the lessee, only has the right to use the asset. Ownership stays with the lessor. Yes, with the lessor. And the lessor can be a financing company or a leasing company. So at the end of the lease, the lessee may return the asset, renew the lease, or sometimes buy it separately, depending on the lease type. We have the financing lease and the operating lease. So depending on the lease type. So in the case of lease and hire purchase, the tax rules look at ownership of the asset, not just who uses it. So in a lease, the lessor, that is the leasing company, is the legal owner. So the lessor, not the lessee now, claims capital allowance, that is the depreciation for tax purpose. So the lessee, the user, cannot claim depreciation because they don't own the asset. So instead, the lessee can deduct the lease rentals, that is the payment made, in full against taxable profit. That is like an operating expense. So the point is this: when it comes to lease, what are the various cash flow? How do you analyze your cash flow? So for the lease, that is for the lessee now, that is the user company, the outflow is the lease rental payment, that is a regular cash payment, while the inflow is the tax benefits. So the inflow is the tax relief on those rentals. For example, if rental is 10,000 naira and tax rate is 30%, then the tax relief will be what? 30% of 10,000 will be 3,000. So the tax relief will be 3,000, while the net cash outflow will be what? 7,000. So the relevant cash flows for the user will be what? The lease payment, the tax relief on the on lease payments. So a lease is like hire purchase in terms of usage, but the key difference is ownership. So under a lease, the lessor owns the asset, so they get the tax depreciation, while the lessee can't claim depreciation, but instead deducts lease rentals from taxable income. So when evaluating leasing, the lessee must consider only the lease payment net of tax relief, as that is their true cost. So the implication is that the finance company receives tax allowable depreciation as the owner of the asset. So the user receives no tax allowable depreciation, but is also able to offset the full rental payment against tax. So the relevant cash flow, as I've said, include the tax, the lease payment, the tax relief on the lease payment. So when it comes to buying likewise, which I've also talked about, when it comes to the buying, the assumption is that the buying requires the use of bank loan for the sake of comparability. So the user is the owner of the asset. The implication is that the user will receive tax allowable depreciation on the assets and tax relief for interest payable on loan. So the relevant cash flow in this case would be what? The purchase cost, any residual value, any associated tax implication due to tax allowable depreciation. So these are the relevant cash flows These are the relevant cash flows. So, in talking about the lease, the lease versus the versus the versus buy, lease versus buy. The point is this: when the use of an asset is required for a new project, there are effectively two decisions to be made. Now, the two decisions when a project needs an asset: if a company wants to start a new project that requires an asset, e.g., an asset such as machine, it faces two decisions, that is, project appraisal decision and financing decision. The question is the project itself worthwhile under the project appraisal decision? And in terms of financing decision, if the project is approved, how should we finance the asset? So under the project appraisal decision, here we check whether the project future benefits exceed cost, usually using NPV, that is the net present value, with the company's cost of capital, that is most times work. So this ensures we only go ahead if the project add value overall. While in the case of financing decision, should we buy it using a loan or internal funds, or should we lease the assets? These are questions begging for answer in relation to lease. Now, how do we evaluate the buy versus lease? So once the project is already approved, what do? You compare only the financing cash flows. So if buying with loan, cash flows are purchase price or loan repayment, less tax relief from depreciation, that is the capital allowance. So if we are to lease, the cash flows are lease rentals, less tax relief from those rentals. So for both, we have to calculate the NPV of cost and choose the option with the lower present value, that is the cheapest financing method. So the question the question now is, which discount rate should we use? Here, the point is this: for the project decision, use the company's cost of capital, that is the WACC, because we are testing whether the project gives a return that matches the firm's overall risk and financing structure. So for the financing decision, either lease or buy, this is not about project risk now, but about comparing alternative financing method. So therefore, the relevant rate will be the cost of debt, that is the borrowing rate, after adjusting for tax, if tax relief is available. So the point is this: use WACC to decide if the project is worth doing. And if the project is worthwhile, then use the after-tax cost of debt to compare the financing alternative, that is lease versus buy. So the cheaper option with the lower NPV of cash outflows should be chosen. When it comes to the lease versus buy. For example, we have this question. Taiwo has already decided to accept a project and is now considering how to finance it. The asset will be leased over 4 years at a rental of what? $36,000 per annum, payable at the start of each year. Take note of that one, at the start of each year. Tax payable at 30%, 1 year in arrears. And the post-tax cost of borrowing is what? 10%. The question is, we are required to calculate the net present value of the leasing option. Now, from this question, it's very important you highlight the variables in the question. One, we have the lease rental, which costs what? $36,000 per annum, and the duration of this lease will be what? 4 years. And the timing of payment will be the beginning of each year. So this is a case of annuity due. Yes. So, and the tax rate given is what? 30%. So tax payment timing, that it is what? 1 year in arrears. The discount rate That is, post-tax cost of borrowing is 10%. So we need the NPV of leasing, that is the present value of net cash outflows after tax. The point is, you need to identify your cash flows. For the lease, for the lessee now, which is Taiwo's company, lease rentals outflow will be what? Will be $36,000 each year, paid at the start of each year. It means the outflow will commence from year 0, year 1, year 2, year 3, because it's at the start, not at the end of the year. And that is why it's starting from point 0, 1, 2, 3. So take note of that. Students oftentimes get confused. Now, when it's starting at the end of the year, to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but at the beginning now, it will be from 0, 1, 2, 3. Take note. Now, the tax relief, which is the inflow, the tax allowable, that is the full lease rental. So it will be what? 30% of 36,000, and that will be what? $10,800 each year. But tax is paid 1 year in arrears. It means tax for year 1 will be due in year 2, tax for year 2 will be due in year 3, tax for year 3 will be due in year 4, in that order. So the inflow, which is the tax savings, the tax shield, we start at what? For year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. So the tax will be paid in arrears. Will be paid in arrears. So the point is, the discount factor, as given in the question, will be what? 10%. The 10%. So this is the solution. For year 0, we have our rentals, because the rental is expected to be paid at the beginning of the year. So we start from year 0, 36,000. Discount factor for year 0 is 1, and the PV will be 36,000. Now, I've applied annuity here. From year 1 to 3, we have the rentals to be 36,000. Since they are constant cash flows, we can apply our annuity, and the discount factor, 10%, using annuity formula, you have 2.487 multiplied by 36,000, you have the present value of 89,532. Present value of 89,532. Now, the point is this: the tax relief paid in arrears. So we have it for year 1, paid in year 2. Now, since it's a constant cash flow, inflow in this case, 10,800, the annuity, for you to get the proper annuity from year 2 to 5, what will you do? To get 2.882, calculate annuity using 10% as a discount factor from year 1 to 5. Then less the discount factor of year 1 from the results. So once you get the discount factor from year 1, the annuity from year 1 to 5, then you less the discount factor for year 1 to get the period 2 to 5. That is 2, year 2 is 1, year 3, 2, year 4, 3, and year 5, 4. So you do it in that order. There is another approach you can use to determine that likewise. So the tax relief will be 10,800 multiplied by 2.882. You have a present value of 31,126. Present value of 31,126. So the MPV now will now be what? Will be 94,406. 94,406. So the point now is this: Taiwo already decided the project itself is worthwhile. So now the issue is how to finance the asset, either by leasing or buying with a loan. So we've calculated the NPV of lease as what? 94,406. So that figure, this figure now represents the value of the total cost to Taiwo if the the lease option is chosen. If the lease option is chosen. So because leasing is purely a financing choice, the relevant cash flows are the lease rentals, that is the outflow, and the tax relief on rentals are inflow. So since tax relief is received 1 year late, inflows are lagged by a year. So we discounted these flows at the after-tax cost of borrowing. So that is 10%. So because the risk here is financing related, not project related. So lease versus loan is essentially about the costs of debt. So the NPV of leasing, which is 94,406, is the cost of leasing in today's money. So if we also calculated the NPV of buying with loan, we will compare the two. So if leasing NPV is less than buying NPV, it means leasing is cheaper and preferred. But if buying NPV is less than leasing NPV, then borrowing to buy is cheaper. So in simple terms, this calculation shows that leasing costs Taiwo 94,406 in present value terms. So to complete the financing decision, this figure must be compared with the PV cost of borrowing to buy the asset. So the cheaper option, that is the cheaper option in terms of NPV, will be the recommended financing method. The recommended financing method. So take note of that. Now let's take it further. Talking about asset replacement decision. Asset replacement decision. So over time, machines, vehicles, or equipment wear out or become outdated. So a finance manager must decide when to replace an old asset with a new one. A finance manager must decide when to replace an asset with a new one. This is very important. The goal is to minimize total costs. That is purchase plus running costs plus maintenance, less resale value, that is scrap value. So to achieve this goal, it is very important that we ensure that the asset remains efficient. Efficient. So one thing we must note is that the technical life of an asset is very key. And the technical life is what? Is the time between when the asset is bought and when it can no longer function or becomes uneconomical to repair. So as assets age, operating and maintenance costs rise. That is, repairs becomes frequent and costly. So resale value falls. Less can be recovered if the asset is sold. So delaying replacement too long may actually increase the overall cost. So that is why an organization needs to have a replacement policy or a way to replace their asset. So we have various types of replacement decision. We have the identical replacement decision, that is replacing an asset with the same type or model. And also we have the analysis focus. This analysis focus on finding the optimal replacement interval. That is, should we replace the asset every 4 years or every 6 years, every 2 years? So that is the concept of this form of replacement decision, identical. Why the non-identical replacement entails replacing the asset with a new and different model, e.g., newer technology, more fuel efficient machines can be incurred as a way of improving over the existing one. Also, in this case, we can comparison can include different purchase costs, running costs, and benefits. So we can have a situation, a replacement situation likewise, where we have with or without cost of capital consideration. Without cost of capital, what we do, we just compare the raw cost, the suitability for short-term investment or simple cases. And also with cost of capital, we use discounted cash flows to consider the time value of money. And this will look at which is more accurate for long-term strategic decisions. So this is also an important issue we look at when we're trying to replace assets. Another important point we look at in looking at asset replacement decision is relevant cash flows that are very key in the replacement analysis. Now, when we try to analyze an asset replacement um, cost or trying to make a decision about replacing an asset, we look at the initial cost, the cost of buying the new asset. We look at the operation and maintenance cost, which increase the longer the asset is kept. Yes. And also we look at the resale value, the realizable value, the scrap value. That is money recovered if the asset is sold before it fully wear out. So the decision balance these factors to minimize the equivalent annual cost. So asset replacement is about choosing the right time to swap out old equipment. So the finance manager must consider the rising cost, fall in resale value, and the cost of the new asset. So this form of asset replacement decisions depends on whether the replacement is for an identical asset or a different one, or whether discounting is used, and so on and so forth. So this must be considered when trying to replace an asset, and this is very important for organization. So you must note that where there are competing replacement for a particular asset, you must compare the possible replacement strategies. A problem arises where equivalent assets available are likely to last for different lengths of time, or an asset once bought must be replaced at regular intervals. So the decision we are concerned with here is how often should the asset be replaced. So the method used will depend on whether we have the cost of capital in question or not. So if there is no cost of capital, we adopt the average cost, that is the total cost divided by the number of periods. And also, if there is discount rate in the question, we use equivalent annual cost or annual equivalent value or equivalent annual cash flow. And it is PV of cost divided by what? Annuity factor. So to take this further, there are key assumptions. The cash inflows from trading are ignored since they will be similar regardless of the replacement decision. In practice, using an older asset may result in lower quality, which in turn could affect sales, and the operating efficiencies of machines will be similar with differing machines and with machines of different ages. So the asset will be replaced in perpetuity, or at least into the foreseeable future. So in most questions, tax and inflation are ignored. So as with all MPV calculations, non-financial aspects such as pollution and safety are ignored, and older machine may have a higher chance of employee accident and may produce more pollution. So note that if required to compare different set of cash inflows with differing lifespans, an equivalent annual benefit calculation can be done using same principle. So we have this example. We have this example that a machine costs $72,000 and has a maximum life of 3 years. The running cost of each machine are as follows: for year one, 7,200; for year two, 9,600; for year three, 12,000. The estimated scrap values are as follows: year one, 24,000; year two, 16,600; year three, 9,600. The cost of capital is 15%. How often should the machine be replaced? How often should the machine be replaced? So let's look at the solution. For year one, we have it as this. Year one replacement cycle. Year one replacement cycle. The cost of the machine is 72. The running cost is 7,200. All these are outflows. Now, in terms of the scrap value, which will be an inflow in year one, we're going to have what? Estimated scrap value will be what? 24. 24,000. This will be an inflow. That is a resale value. Now, applying the discount factor of 15 for year 0, 1 multiplied by 72, you have 72,000 as the present value for year 2. For year 1, the discount factor result of 15 will result into 0.870 multiplied by 7,200. You have a present value of 6264. And for year 1, regarding the resale value in year 1, you have 0.870 multiplied by 24. You have 2880. And you do the plus and minus, the MPV will be 57,384 when we apply the 1-year replacement cycle. Now, the equivalent annual cost will now be what? Will now be 57,384 divided by 1-year annuity. Discount factor, we have it as what? 57,384 divided by 0.87, we have $65,959 per annum. Now, when the asset is to be replaced in the second year, in year 2, now take note, the initial cost is 72. The running cost in year 2 will be 9,600, and the scrap value will be what? 16,700. You apply same approach. When you do that, you have the MPV of what? 72,972. The equivalent annual cost will now be what? 72,972 divided by what? Divided by the year 2 annuity discount factor, and you're going to have it as what? You're going to have it as 1.62672,972 divided by 1.626. You have 44,878 per annum. And for year 3, the results will be what? Applying same approach, the initial cost 72, the initial cost 72, the running cost in year 1 72, running cost in year 2 9,600, and the running cost in year 3 12,000, and the resale value, scrap value 9,600. And you apply all these now, the annuity of the third year will result into what? 87,101 divided by 2.83. You have the equivalent annual cost of what? 38,152 per annum. So in relation to this, the decision rule is to adopt the equivalent annual cost with the least value. And when you look at this, you discover that the equivalent annual cost in year 3 is the lowest. So therefore, the company should keep the machine for the full 3 years before replacing it. So this is very important. And why should the organization do this? Because at the third year, we have the lowest equivalent annual cost of what? Of 38,152 compared to 44,878 compared to 65,959. And that is the basis of this decision. This is the basis of this decision. And we have an assignment here. You can attempt, fine. You can forward to me. You're watching via YouTube. Send a message on the YouTube for me to check and evaluate this. And we have limitation of replacement analysis. The model assumes that when an asset is replaced, the replacement is in all practical respects identical to the last one, and that this process will continue for the foreseeable future. However, in practice, this will not hold true owing to the fact that we have change in technology, we have inflation, and we have changes in production plans. So these may affect the replacement decisions that have been set by organization. Now, let's talk about capital rationing. When we talk about capital rationing happens when a company has more profitable projects, more positive projects with more positive MPV than it has money to fund. When you have good opportunities, but there is insufficient fund to finance those projects, the issue of capital rationing will set in. So capital rationing is defined as a situation in which a company has a limited amount of resources to invest in viable investment opportunities, such that the different possible investment need to be compared with one another in order to allocate the capital available most effectively and efficiently. So we can therefore summarize capital rationing as situations where funds are not available to finance all viable projects that will increase shareholders' wealth. So it therefore means that a company is in such scenario will not be able to accept or consider projects with positive NPV because of inadequate fund, and these will definitely affect the company's market value and ability to grow at the desired rate will be impaired. So, in other words, I would say on we can have capital rationing in a case as a case where organizations have unlimited funds, where an organization has an unlimited funds, it means they can accept all projects with positive NPV. In this case, there is no scarcity of fund. There is much money. As opportunity shows up for an organization, can decide to invest because in this case, they don't have limited resources. They have unlimited fund to finance all projects. We can have a case of capital rationing where you can't accept all projects because investment funds are limited. Investment funds are limited. So the question is why capital rationing happens. We can have externally imposed capital rationing where lenders or marketers restrict how much the firm can raise. For example, debt limit, equity issue, and some other difficulties. We can also have a case of internally imposed capital rationing. In this case, the management deliberately sets a cap on investment spending, set a ceiling, a limit on investment spending to control risk, to maintain liquidity, or avoid over trading. The, the point is this: some projects that will increase shareholders' wealth cannot be cannot be taken up if we have issues of scarce resources. Yes, even when NPVs are positive. So companies' market value may not grow as much as possible, and companies' growth rate is constrained. So in effect, scarce capital must be allocated only to the best project. And that is why the concept of capital rationing is key, where you have limited resources, limited finance to finance certain projects. So we have types of capital rationing, which I've highlighted, talking about internal and external. So we have soft rationing. This is the internal and within the company's control, which is normally referred to as management imposed limit on investment expenditure as an aid to finance control. So a company may impose its own rationing on capital. This is contrary to the rational view of shareholders' wealth maximization. And also we can have this relates to non-availability of capital from external sources, and it relates to market imperfections because in a perfect market, capital is expected to be freely available. And as long as a company is able to identify projects that gives positive NPV, it should be able to raise the finance required. So this is an absolute limit on the amount of finance available which is imposed by lending institutions. So capital rationing is when limited funds prevent a company from accepting all value-adding projects. So this forces managers to prioritize investment, often using techniques like the profitability index, but it also means that some positive NPV projects must be rejected, slowing growth and reducing potential market value, as I've earlier mentioned. So we can have cases where we have a single or one period capital rationing. When we have a single or one period capital rationing, this is when the shortage of funds only applies in one period, just a year, this year only. So after that, funds are assumed to be unlimited again, available. Yes, because funds are scarce in this period, projects must be ranked to decide which ones to take. So the ranking tool most times is the profitability index. Is the profitability index. So based on this slide, we said the single or one period capital rationing relates to situation where finance will only be constrained for a single period, and after that period, fund is expected to be freely available where capital rationing occur in a single period. Projects are ranked in terms of profitability, and the higher the profitability index, the better the project. So there are two possibilities within this single period capital rationing, and we can have a case of divisible project. In this situation, it is assumed that proportion of a project can be undertaken and proportion of the project net present value will also be achieved. So in this case, it means projects are divisible, can have undertake fractions of projects, fractions of projects. So where projects is divisible, we assume project can be partly undertaken. For example, if a project requires 1 million and produces NPV of 200,000, we could invest only 500,000 and get half of the NPV of 100. In this case, we treat project like fractions, that is allowing us to allocate scarce capital across projects like portfolio, like a portfolio, yes. So this works like the knapsack problem with fractional items. So the point is we select projects in descending in based on the projects with the best profitability index, and we allocate funds until the funds available is exhausted. So we can also have the case of indivisible projects. Within this situation, fraction of a project cannot be undertaken. So we either accept the project in totality or reject it. With indivisible project must be taken all or nothing. So a whole project must be taken, or we don't take any fraction of it. So we cannot accept a fraction of the project. So if a project costs 1 million, we must either commit the full of 1 million or skip it. So here, ranking by profitability index alone may not give the optimal combination. So sometimes we include some other approach, yes, such as programming, the try and error approach. There is the internal rate of return to find the best set of projects that maximizes the total NPV within the budget. So talking about profitability index is the ratio that measures the present value of a future cash flows per 1 naira, per 1 naira. That is profitability index is a measure that shows the value created per 1 naira invested in a project. It is used especially in capital rationing when funds are limited to projects, to finance projects. So for you to determine your profitability index, it is your present value of cash inflows divided by present value of capital investment. It can also be PV of future cash inflows divided by PV of investment outflows. So the point is this: if profitability index is greater than one, project is profitable. But if NPV is what is greater than 0, it shows that the project is profitable. So if the NPV is equal to 0, it means that the project breaks even. The project breaks even. That is where the profitability index is 1. It means the project breaks even. So if the profitability index is less than 1, that is, project should be rejected. The project should be rejected. So the point is this: we have a question that Ayo is contributing for projects K, L, M, and N with the following data. We have project K, the investment required, the initial investment is 30,000. The present value of cash inflows is 33,720. The NPV, as given in the question, is 3,720. The profitability index is 1.12, and based on ranking. Now, ranking based on NPV of each of these projects, we discover that project N is having the highest NPV and is ranking first, and project M is ranking second with 6,690, and project K is ranking third with 3,720 based on net present value, and project L is ranking fourth with 2,973 NPV. Now, based on profitability index, we can see that project K is having the highest value in terms of profitability index of 1.12, is ranking first, and project N is having the highest profitability, the next highest profitability index of 1.10, and project M is having 1.07 as the next profitability index, and project L is having 1.05 as the fourth project with the next profitability index. The question is, without capital rationing, all projects will be accepted based on the fact that they have a positive NPV. But if capital is constant and only 180,000 naira is available, our conclusion will be based on profitability index. Now, the point is this: we have 180,000 available for us to spend. Now, based on ranking, the project N is ranking what? Is ranking first in terms of NPV. And how much do we need to invest in project N? The initial capital outlay is 120. So we have it. Now, out of 180, if we use 120 to invest in project N, we have how much left? We have 60. Now, which is ranking next based on profitability index? Based on profitability index, or based on NPV rather, which is ranking next? M is ranking next. And how much do we need? We need 90,000. We have a balance of what? Of 60,000. So what is the fraction of 60,000 in 90,000? So that is why we have it here as 60 divided by 90. It means we'll have what? 0.6666. In terms of fraction, it will be 2 over 3. It means 2 over 3 of 90 can be undertaken with 60,000. So for us to exhaust the whole of 180, 60,000 will be used to finance parts of project M, So the NPV will now be what? Will now be 0.666 multiplied by what? The value of this value of what? Of NPV, the value of NPV here, to give us the portion of NPV that is due to the organization based on the fact that they are investing 60,000 in this project. So we have it as 0.666 multiplied by 6,690. We have the NPV of 4,460. So the total is 180 and the total NPV is 15,863. So based on NPV, we accept project N and 2 over 3 of M at the total NPV of 15,863. It should be noted that we have assumed that the projects are what? Divisible. And when we base our calculation on profitability index, take note we have 180 to spend. Now the project's ranking first based on profitability index is what? Project K. How much do we need? 30,000. That is why we have 30,000. Which is ranking next based on profitability index? which is ranking next based on profitability index. We have project N, and how much do we need to invest? 120, and that is why we have 120 here. We have how much left? Because we have 30,000 left, so 120 plus 30 is 150, and we have 180,000 to spend, so we are left with 30, which is ranking next based on profitability index. Third, we have what? We have project M. How much do we need? We need 90, but we only have 30,000, so we can invest 30,000 in project M, since we've assumed they are divisible project. So 30 all over 90 is 1 over 3. So 1 over 3 of the MPV of 6690 will give us, 1 over 3, yes, of the MPV of 6690 will give us what? 2,230. So based on profitability index, we should accept project K, N, and 1 over 3 of M at a total MPV of what? 17,353. So also we can have a case of single period rationing with non-divisible project. In this case, we have an example that says Fee has capital of 95,000 available for investment in the forthcoming period. The directors decide to consider project P, Q, and R only. They wish to invest the whole project in whole projects, but surplus funds can be invested. Which combination of projects will produce the highest MPV at a cost of capital of 20%? At a cost of capital of 20%. That's which combination of projects produce the highest MPV. Now, this is it. What combination of projects? We combine project P and Q. What would be the MPV? We combine project Q and R. Combine projects P and R. What will be the MPV? Now, the total investment when you combine P and R will be what? P and R will give you what? That is 40,000 plus 30. You have what? P and R, you have 70. You have 70 when you combine P and R. And also, when you combine Q and R, you're going to have what? Q and R, that is 50 plus 30. You're going to have what? You're going to have 80. You're going to have 80. And also, when we combine, I think there is a mistake here. Yes, P and R. P and R, and this was this. We have 90. Okay. So P and Q. It should be P and Q. Yes, P and Q. So when you add the investments for P and Q, this plus this is 90. And when you add for P and R, you have 70. For Q and R, you have what? You have 80. So the PV of inflows, the PV, the present value of the inflows, when you add them together likewise, you have what? For P and Q, you have 1, 2, 3, 500. And for P and R, you have what? 105, 300. And for Q and R, you have 115, 800. So MPV from combined projects will now be what? Will now be 1, 2, 3, 500 minus 90. You have 33, 500. And 105, 300 minus 70. You have 35, 300. 115, 800 minus 80,000. You have 35, 800. So the highest MPV will be achieved by undertaking projects Q and R with 35,800. and investing the unused funds of 15,000 externally, because these are indivisible projects. It's either you undertake P and Q or not, or don't undertake any when you combine both two or more projects. So we have an assignment here that the company has $100,000 available for investment and has identified the following 5 investments in which to invest. All investment must be stated now in year 0. You are required to determine which project should be chosen to maximize the return to business. And also another one, that the company from TU5 has the same problem as before, but this time the projects are indivisible. The information is reproduced below. The company has $100,000 available, $100,000 available for investments, and has identified the following 5 investments in which to invest. All investments must be stated now. Now, the question is determine the optimal project selection. So this is it for short-term financing, short-term or specific investment decision, specific investment decision. So in conclusion, I would say that the profitability index tells us how much value is created per unit of investment. So it is useful under capital rationing, and where we can't fund all the positive projects with NPV, we must prioritize those projects with highest efficiency in using the scarce capital. So you keep getting more videos on the channel. Thank you for your time.